The stars had always been silent. For thousands of years, humanity looked up at the night sky and wondered if they were alone. They sent radio signals into the darkness. They launched probes with golden records. They built telescopes that could see billions of light years away. But the universe never answered back. Until now. The year was 2347, and humanity had grown strong in their small corner of the galaxy. They had built cities on Mars. They had mining stations on the moons of Jupiter. They had research bases floating in the clouds of Venus. But they had never left their own solar system. They had never found a way to travel faster than light. And they had never met another intelligent species. That changed on a cold Tuesday morning when Dr. Sarah Kim spilled her coffee. She was working the night shift at the Deep Space Monitoring Station in northern Canada. It was a boring job most of the time. She watched screens filled with static and waited for something interesting to happen. Nothing ever did. The universe was empty. Or so everyone believed. Then her computer started screaming. The alarm was so loud and so sudden that Sarah jumped in her chair. Hot coffee splashed across her desk and onto her keyboard. She ignored the mess and stared at her screen with wide eyes. The numbers made no sense. They could not be real, but they were real. Something had appeared beyond Neptune. Not one something. Thousands of somethings. They had come out of nowhere, like ghosts, stepping through a door that should not exist. Her instruments counted them automatically, and the number kept climbing. 500, 1,000, 1,500, 2,000, 2,000 objects, each one bigger than any ship humanity had ever built. Sarah's hands were shaking when she picked up the phone. She called her supervisor. Who called his supervisor? Who called the military? Who called the president of the United Terran Council? Within 1 hour, every leader on Earth knew the truth. They were not alone. And whatever had come to visit them had brought an army. Far across the solar system, Commander Zoreth Velkan stood on the bridge of his flagship and smiled. He was tall for his species, with gray skin and 4 eyes that glowed a soft yellow in the dim light. He had commanded fleets for over 60 cycles. He had conquered 37 worlds. He had never lost a battle. This conquest would be the easiest of his career. "Report," he said, and his voice echoed through the massive bridge. "All ships have completed transit, Commander," replied his first officer. "The fleet is in formation. We are ready to advance." Velkan nodded slowly. Behind him, through the massive windows of his flagship, he could see his armada stretching across the darkness of space. 2,000 warships of the Valthari Dominion, the greatest military force in 3 galaxies. They had crushed over 400 worlds. They had brought 12 species under their control. Their empire stretched across stars too numerous to count. And now they had come for Earth. "Show me the intelligence reports," Velkan ordered. Holographic images appeared in the air before him. He saw pictures of Earth, a small blue planet covered in water and clouds. He saw images of human cities, human vehicles, human technology. His analysts had been studying this species for several cycles, ever since their scouts first detected radio signals coming from this remote corner of space. "They call themselves humans," the intelligence officer explained. "They are a young species. They have only been in space for about 300 of their years. They have colonized several worlds in their system, but they have no faster-than-light capability. Their weapons are primitive: chemical rockets, nuclear devices, simple energy weapons, nothing that could threaten our shields." "What about their military forces?" Velkan asked. "Minimal, Commander. They have small defensive fleets around their inner planets, but nothing compared to our power. Our estimates suggest the conquest will take no more than 3 rotations." Velkan made a sound that was something like a laugh. 3 rotations to conquer an entire species. Almost disappointing. "There is one unusual thing, Commander," the intelligence officer added. "Our analysts have noticed that humans seem to spend a great deal of resources on hidden projects. There are facilities we cannot scan, bunkers we cannot see inside, and energy signatures we cannot identify. It is curious." "Curious?" Velkan turned his 4 eyes toward the officer. "Or irrelevant?" "Almost certainly irrelevant, Commander. They are a pre-ascension species. Whatever they are hiding, it cannot be significant. They simply do not have the technology to threaten us. Then we proceed as planned." Velkan turned back to the window and watched his fleet gliding through space like a swarm of metal predators. "Send the standard message. Inform them that they are now subjects of the Valthari Dominion. They may surrender peacefully, or they may be destroyed. The choice is theirs. The message was sent. It traveled across the solar system at the speed of light, reaching Earth in just over 4 hours. When it arrived, it was translated instantly by computers that had been waiting for this moment for 200 years. In a bunker buried deep beneath the Swiss Alps, Defense Secretary Elena Vasquez read the alien message on her screen. She was a small woman with gray hair and sharp eyes. She had spent her entire career preparing for a day that many believed would never come. Now it was here. "They want us to surrender," she said quietly. Around her, a dozen officers watched and waited. They knew what was hidden in the asteroid belt. They knew what was sleeping beneath the surface of the moon. They knew what humanity had been building in secret for 2 centuries. "What are your orders, Madam Secretary?" asked General Morrison. Vasquez stood up slowly. She walked to the main screen, which showed a map of the solar system. The alien fleet was marked in red, 2,000 points of light creeping closer to everything humanity had ever built. 200 years ago, she said, our ancestors made a decision. They looked at the galaxy and saw what it really was. Not a place of peace and friendship, but a jungle. A place where the strong take from the weak, and the weak disappear forever. They decided that humanity would never be weak. They decided that we would hide our strength until the day it was needed. She pressed a button on her console. Today is that day. Activate Project Silence. Across the solar system, lights began to turn on in the darkness. Inside hollowed asteroids, beneath lunar craters, floating silently in the empty space between worlds, 10,000 weapons platforms woke from their long sleep. Their power cores hummed to life. Their targeting systems began to scan. Their weapons, built on principles that no other species in the galaxy had ever discovered, began to charge. But the aliens could not see any of this. The platforms were invisible to their sensors, designed from the beginning to be undetectable. The Valthari looked at the solar system and saw only a helpless, primitive species waiting to be conquered. They could not have been more wrong. "One more thing," Vasquez said. "Before we end this, I want to give them a chance. Send the olive branch. Let Captain Chen deliver our message. Let them hear our warning, face to face." "You think they will listen?" General Morrison asked. Vasquez shook her head sadly. "No, they never do. But we have to try. That is what makes us human." In a hangar on Mars, a single small ship powered up its engines. It was unarmed. It carried no weapons. It had only one passenger, a man named Marcus Chen, who knew he was about to meet beings who could kill him with a single thought. But he was not afraid. He had seen what humanity could do, and he knew that the aliens had no idea what was coming. The olive branch launched into the darkness, carrying humanity's final warning toward a fleet that would never listen. Captain Marcus Chen had always believed that courage was not about being unafraid. It was about being terrified and doing the right thing anyway. As his small ship flew toward 2,000 alien warships, he had never been more terrified in his life. The olive branch was a tiny vessel, barely 50 meters long. It had no weapons, no shields, nothing that could protect it from the massive fleet that filled the space ahead. Through his cockpit window, Chen could see the alien ships growing larger with every passing minute. They were enormous dark metal giants covered in strange symbols and glowing with alien energy. His radio crackled to life. "Unknown vessel. You are entering Valthari space. Identify yourself and state your purpose, or you will be destroyed." Chen took a deep breath and pressed the transmit button. "This is Captain Marcus Chen of the United Terran Council. I am an ambassador from the planet Earth. I carry an important message for your commander. I request permission to come aboard and deliver it in person." There was a long pause. Chen could imagine the aliens laughing at his tiny ship, wondering why this primitive creature was flying toward them instead of running away. "Your request is unusual," the voice finally replied. "Hold your position. You will be contacted." Chen waited. Minutes passed, then an hour. He sat alone in his small cockpit, watching the alien fleet and thinking about his family back on Earth. His daughter was only 7 years old. She did not know where her father was or what he was doing. She only knew that he had to go away for a while on an important trip. He hoped he would see her again. Finally, the radio spoke once more. "Captain Chen, your request has been approved. You will be brought aboard the flagship. Do not resist." A beam of blue light surrounded his ship. Chen felt a strange pulling sensation, and then his vessel was moving on its own, dragged toward the largest ship in the fleet by some invisible force. Within minutes, he was inside an alien hangar, surrounded by hundreds of soldiers pointing weapons at his cockpit. He opened the door and stepped out with his hands raised. The aliens were tall and frightening. They had gray skin, 4 eyes, and bodies that looked like they were built for war. They wore armor that seemed to shift and change as they moved. They looked at Chen like he was an insect, something small and worthless that existed only for their amusement. A soldier grabbed his arm and pulled him roughly down a long corridor. They passed through doors that opened automatically, and rooms filled with strange machines. Everywhere Chen looked, he saw more aliens watching him with curious, mocking eyes. Finally, they reached the bridge. It was a massive space, bigger than any room Chen had ever seen. Hundreds of officers worked at glowing consoles. Screens covered the walls, showing images of the fleet and the distant sun at the center of the solar system. And at the center of it all stood Commander Velkan. The alien commander was impressive and terrifying. He stood over 2 meters tall, and his 4 yellow eyes glowed with intelligence and cruelty. He looked at Chen the way a cat looks at a mouse it is about to eat. "So," Velkan said, "this is a human. Smaller than I expected." The officers around him laughed. Chen stood straight and kept his face calm. He had trained for this moment for years. He knew exactly what he had to do. "Commander Velkan," he said, "I bring a message from the people of Earth. Will you hear it?" Velkan made a gesture with one of his 4 hands. "Speak, little creature. Entertain us." Chen reached into his pocket and pulled out a small device. Several soldiers raised their weapons, but Velkan waved them back. Chen pressed a button, and a holographic image appeared in the air, a recording of Defense Secretary Vasquez, speaking in a calm and steady voice. To the commanders of the approaching fleet, the recording said, "You have entered sovereign Terran space. You are hereby ordered to withdraw beyond the boundary of our solar system within 6 standard hours. This is not a negotiation. This is not a request. This is your only warning." The bridge grew quiet. Every alien eye was fixed on the hologram. "Failure to comply will result in the complete destruction of your forces. There will be no second warning. There will be no survivors. Your time begins now." The recording ended. Silence filled the bridge. Then Velkan started to laugh. It was a deep, rumbling sound that echoed through the massive room. Within seconds, every officer on the bridge was laughing with him. They pointed at Chen and made sounds that might have been jokes in their language. One of them pretended to shake with fear, and the others laughed even harder. "Play it again," Velkan demanded, wiping tears from his eyes. "I want to hear it again." Chen played the recording a second time. The aliens laughed even louder. "This is wonderful," Velkan said when he could finally speak again. "A pre-ascension species with no real technology, no real weapons and no real military, threatening the greatest fleet in 3 galaxies. Do you understand how ridiculous you sound, little human?" Chen remained calm. "I understand how it must seem to you, Commander. But I am asking you to listen, please. Turn your fleet around. Leave our system. Do not force us to act." Velkan stepped closer, bending down until his face was just centimeters from Chen's. His breath smelled like something old and dead. "Let me tell you something, human. In my career, I have conquered 37 worlds. I have killed billions of creatures like you. Some begged for mercy. Some tried to fight. Some even threatened me. Just as you are doing now. Do you know what happened to all of them?" He leaned even closer. "They died. Every single one. And your species will be no different." Chen did not look away. He stared directly into those 4 glowing eyes and spoke quietly. "I volunteered for this mission, Commander. I came here knowing that you would probably laugh at me. I came here knowing that you would not believe me. But I had to try, because I have seen what happens next. I have seen what my people can do, and I wanted to give you a chance to live." He paused. "Please, turn around. Take your fleet and go home. Hug your families. Watch your children grow. Live your lives, because if you stay here, if you ignore this warning, none of you will survive. Not one ship, not one soldier, not one life. You will all die, and you will die so quickly that you will not even understand what killed you." For just a moment, something flickered in Velkan's eyes. It might have been doubt. It might have been fear. But then it was gone, replaced by anger and contempt. "Take him back to his ship," the commander ordered. "Let him run home to his planet. Let him watch as we conquer his world and enslave his people. Let him live with that memory for the rest of his short life. Soldiers grabbed Chen's arms and dragged him toward the door. As he was being pulled away, he looked back at the bridge one final time. "I am sorry," he said. "I truly am." Then he was gone. Velkan watched the human's tiny ship fly away toward Earth. Around him, his officers were still chuckling about the ridiculous warning. "Begin the advance," the commander ordered. "We attack in 6 hours." None of them noticed the young officer standing quietly in the corner of the bridge. Her name was Lieutenant Sira Kell, and she was not laughing. She was watching the human ship disappear into the distance. And she was thinking about the look in Captain Chen's eyes. It was not the look of a man who was bluffing. It was the look of a man who was saying goodbye. The countdown began. 6 hours. That was all the time the Valthari had left to live. But they did not know it. They could not imagine it. They were too busy preparing for an easy victory. Commander Velkan stood on his bridge and watched his fleet move into attack formation. 2,000 warships arranged themselves in perfect patterns, their weapons charging, their crews ready for battle. It was a beautiful sight, the most powerful military force in 3 galaxies, about to crush another helpless world. "Status report," he demanded. "All ships in position, Commander. Weapons at full power. We will reach Earth orbit in 5 hours and 43 minutes. Velkan nodded with satisfaction. He had done this many times before. First, they would destroy any orbital defenses. Then they would bomb the major cities until the humans surrendered. Then the slave ships would arrive to process the population. It was efficient. It was routine. It was boring, really. But something strange was happening back on Earth. Captain Chen had returned safely. His small ship landed on Mars, and he was immediately taken to a secure room where Defense Secretary Vasquez was waiting on a video screen. "Did they listen?" she asked. Chen shook his head slowly. "No, Madam Secretary," they laughed. "They think we are helpless." Vasquez was silent for a long moment. Her face showed no emotion, but Chen could see the weight of responsibility in her eyes. She was about to order the deaths of millions of living beings. It was not something anyone could do without feeling the cost. "Then they have made their choice," she said quietly. "May God forgive us for what happens next." She ended the call. In the bunker beneath the Swiss Alps, the countdown timer continued to run. 5 hours and 30 minutes remained. Around the world, people were going about their normal lives. They had been told about the alien fleet, of course. The government could not hide something so large. But they had also been told not to worry. Earth had defenses. Earth was protected. Everything would be fine. Most people believed this. They had to. The alternative was too frightening to accept. But deep in the asteroid belt, something was waking up. The weapons platforms of Project Silence had slept for 200 years. They were hidden inside hollowed asteroids, floating in the debris between Mars and Jupiter. From the outside, they looked like ordinary rocks, boring, harmless, invisible. Their surfaces were covered with sensors that made them impossible to detect with any known technology. But inside, they were anything but ordinary. Each platform contained a power core built on scientific principles that humanity had never shared with anyone. These cores could generate more energy than a small star. And that energy powered weapons that could do things no other species in the galaxy had ever imagined. One by one, the platforms began to wake up. Their power cores hummed to life. Their targeting computers activated. Their weapons, long tubes of dark metal that seemed to absorb light, began to glow with a faint purple energy. 10,000 platforms. 10,000 weapons. All of them pointed at the approaching fleet. On the Valthari flagship, Lieutenant Sira Kell could not stop thinking about the human ambassador. She kept replaying the scene in her mind, the way he had stood so calmly before Commander Velkan, the way he had spoken without fear, the way he had looked at them with something that almost seemed like pity. She was young for an officer, barely 20 cycles old. She had joined the military because her family expected it, not because she wanted to conquer other species. Sometimes, late at night, she wondered if what they were doing was right, but she never said anything. Questioning the Dominion was dangerous. Now she was sitting at her console, watching the sensor data from the human solar system, and something was bothering her. "Lieutenant Kell?" Her supervisor's voice interrupted her thoughts. "Is there a problem?" Sira hesitated. She knew she should stay quiet. She knew nobody wanted to hear concerns from a junior officer. but she could not ignore what she was seeing. "Sir, I am detecting unusual energy readings from the asteroid belt. They appeared about 30 minutes ago, and they are growing stronger." Her supervisor walked over and looked at her screen. He frowned. "Those readings are strange," he admitted. "But they are probably just natural phenomena. Solar radiation, reflecting off minerals. Something like that. With respect, sir, I have never seen solar radiation produce this pattern. The energy signatures are too regular, too organized. They almost look like..." She stopped herself. "Like what, Lieutenant?" "Like weapons powering up." Her supervisor laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Lieutenant, we have scanned this system thoroughly. The humans have no significant military forces. They have no weapons that could threaten us. You are seeing things that are not there. But sir, enough." His voice was cold. "Return to your duties. Do not waste time on imaginary threats." Sira wanted to argue, but she knew it was pointless. She turned back to her console and watched the strange energy readings grow stronger. Something was very wrong. She could feel it in her bones. 4 hours left. On Earth, the cities were quiet. People had stopped going to work. Families gathered in their homes, watching the news, waiting for updates. Some prayed. Some cried. Some simply held their loved ones and tried to be brave. In the bunker, Defense Secretary Vasquez sat alone in her office. A photograph of her grandchildren sat on her desk. She looked at their smiling faces and wondered what kind of galaxy they would grow up in. Would they live in peace? Would they know freedom? Or would they spend their lives as slaves to some alien empire? Not if she could help it. 3 hours left. The Valthari fleet continued its advance. Commander Velkan had retired to his quarters for a meal. He was eating something that looked like purple meat, confident that nothing could possibly go wrong. His officers were relaxed. Some were joking about what they would do with their share of the human slaves. Some were already spending their victory bonuses in their minds. Only Lieutenant Sira Kell was worried. She had run every analysis she could think of, and the energy readings from the asteroid belt kept growing. They were definitely not natural. Something was out there, something big, something the Valthari could not see. She thought about going to Commander Velkan, but she knew what would happen. He would dismiss her concerns just like her supervisor had. He would call her paranoid. He might even punish her for wasting his time. So she sat at her console and watched the countdown timer on her screen. 2 hours. 1 hour. 30 minutes. The human solar system remained silent. No messages. No pleas for mercy. No signs of fear. Just silence. Sira had been in many battles. She knew what it looked like when an enemy was terrified. They sent desperate communications. They tried to negotiate. They panicked. The humans were doing none of these things. They were just waiting. That was what scared her most of all. 15 minutes left. Commander Velkan returned to the bridge, refreshed from his meal. He looked at the main screen, which showed Earth growing larger as the fleet approached. A beautiful planet. A rich planet. It would make a fine addition to the Dominion. "Are we ready?" he asked. "All ships report ready, Commander. The attack will begin in 15 minutes. Velkan smiled. "Excellent. Begin final approach." The fleet surged forward, 2,000 engines firing in perfect synchronization. They flew toward Earth like a wave of death, unstoppable and overwhelming. Lieutenant Sira Kell closed her eyes and whispered a prayer to gods she had stopped believing in long ago. 5 minutes left. The energy readings in the asteroid belt reached their peak. 1 minute left. Somewhere, in a bunker beneath the mountains of Earth, Defense Secretary Vasquez watched the countdown timer reach 0. She pressed a button, and the universe changed forever. The first thing Lieutenant Sira Kell noticed was the light. It came from everywhere at once, 10,000 points of purple energy appearing in the darkness of space. One moment there was nothing but empty void and distant stars. The next moment, the universe was filled with weapons. They emerged from asteroids that had seemed completely dead. They rose from craters on distant moons. They uncloaked from positions throughout the solar system, revealing themselves for the first time in 200 years. The weapons platforms of Project Silence had finally awakened. Sira had exactly enough time to understand what she was seeing before the beams fired. They were not like any weapons the galaxy had ever known. They did not shoot plasma or missiles or lasers. Instead, they fired concentrated beams of gravitons, the particles that created gravity itself. These beams passed through shields as if they did not exist. They passed through armor like it was made of paper. And when they touched matter, something terrible happened. The molecular bonds that held atoms together simply fell apart. Commander Velkan's flagship was the first to die. The beam struck the massive ship at exactly 0.7 seconds after the platforms fired. Velkan was standing on his bridge, watching the strange lights appear throughout space, trying to understand what he was seeing. He had just opened his mouth to give an order when the beam hit. There was no explosion. There was no fire. There was no sound. The ship simply stopped existing. One moment it was there, a kilometer of metal and technology and living beings. The next moment it was gone, dissolved into a cloud of atoms spreading across empty space. Commander Velkan did not have time to feel fear. He did not have time to regret his choices. He did not have time to think about the warning he had laughed at just hours before. His consciousness ended before his brain could even process what was happening. He was there, and then he was not. It was that simple. At 1.3 seconds, 300 more ships vanished. The beams moved at nearly the speed of light, crossing the gap between weapons and targets almost instantly. Ships that were tens of thousands of kilometers apart were destroyed at almost the same moment, their crews dying without ever knowing they were under attack. Lieutenant Syracel watched from her ship at the rear of the fleet. She was frozen at her console, her 4 eyes wide with horror, her mouth open in a silent scream. Ahead of her, the greatest armada in 3 galaxies was disappearing. The ships were not exploding. They were not breaking apart. They were simply ceasing to exist. Where massive warships had flown seconds before, there was now only empty space and slowly dispersing clouds of atoms. It was like watching buildings made of sand being washed away by invisible waves. At 2.1 seconds, over 1,000 ships were gone. The Valthari had not fired a single shot. They had not launched a single missile. They had not even had time to raise their shields. Their technology, their training, their experience, none of it mattered. They were being erased. Some captains tried to run. They turned their ships around and tried to flee back toward the hyperspace jump point they had used to enter the system. But the weapons platforms tracked every movement, calculated every trajectory, and fired with perfect precision. There was nowhere to hide. There was nowhere to escape. The beams found them all. At 2.8 seconds, Lieutenant Syrakel's ship was targeted. She saw the beam coming. It was a thin line of purple light, beautiful in a terrible way, cutting across the darkness of space directly toward her. In that fraction of a second, 1,000 thoughts flashed through her mind. She thought about her home world, a place of green forests and silver lakes that she had not seen in years. She thought about her clutch siblings, the 4 brothers and sisters who had hatched alongside her, who were probably going about their normal lives right now, not knowing that she was about to die. She thought about her mother, who had cried when Syrah joined the military, who had begged her to find a safer profession. She thought about the human ambassador, Captain Chen, and the look in his eyes when he had delivered his warning. He had known. He had seen this coming. He had tried to save them, and they had laughed at him. The beam reached her ship at 4 seconds. Syrakel ceased to exist. Her atoms, along with the atoms of everyone else on her ship, dissolved into the void. She felt no pain. She had no final moment of consciousness. One instant she was alive, and the next instant she was nothing but dust floating in the endless darkness of space. At 4.7 seconds, the last Valthari ship vanished. Silence fell across the solar system, where 2,000 warships had flown moments before. There was now only empty space. No wreckage, no debris, no escape pods, nothing but clouds of atoms slowly dispersing into the void, becoming one with the darkness between the stars. The greatest military force in 3 galaxies had been completely destroyed in less than 5 seconds. On Earth, Defense Secretary Vasquez sat motionless in her chair, staring at the screens that surrounded her. The displays showed the positions of all alien ships. Moments ago, there had been 2,000 red dots filling the outer solar system. Now there were none. "Confirm," she said, and her voice was barely more than a whisper. General Morrison checked his instruments 3 times before answering. His hands were shaking. "Total fleet destruction confirmed, Madam Secretary. All 2,000 enemy vessels have been eliminated. No survivors detected. Total engagement time, 4.7 seconds. Nobody cheered. Nobody celebrated. The room was absolutely silent. Vasquez had spent her entire career preparing for this moment. She had studied the weapons. She had reviewed the plans. She had known exactly what would happen when she pressed that button. But knowing something and seeing it were very different things. In less than 5 seconds, millions of alien beings had died. They had come to conquer Earth, yes. They had intended to kill billions of humans and enslave the rest. But they had still been living creatures with families and friends and hopes and dreams, and now they were all gone. Reduced to nothing but atoms floating in space. It was necessary. It was justified. It was self-defense. Vasquez believed all of these things, but it was still the worst thing she had ever done. She stood up slowly and walked to the main screen. The solar system map was empty now. No threats, no enemies, just the silent darkness of space. Transmit the message, she ordered. Send it to every species that was watching. Let them know what happened here. General Morrison nodded and typed commands into his console. Moments later, a signal was broadcast across the galaxy, traveling through hyperspace relays that humanity had secretly built over the past century. It reached every major civilization within minutes, the empires and federations and dominions that had been watching from the shadows, waiting to see if the Valthari would succeed. The message was short. Just 3 words. We warned them. Across the galaxy, beings of 100 different species read those words and felt something they had not felt in a very long time. Fear. Captain Marcus Chen stood on the observation deck of the Mars station, looking out at the stars. Somewhere out there, in the darkness beyond Neptune, millions of beings had just died because they refused to listen to him. He had tried. He had looked into Commander Velkon's eyes and begged him to turn around. He had given them every chance to survive, but they had chosen pride over wisdom, contempt over caution, and now they were gone. Chen did not feel victorious. He felt tired and sad and very, very old. His communicator beeped. It was a message from Earth, a video from his daughter, who was too young to understand what had just happened but old enough to know that her father had been on an important mission. "Daddy," she said in the video, smiling and waving. "When are you coming home?" Chen wiped a tear from his eye and started recording his reply. "Soon, sweetheart. Very soon." The solar system was safe. Humanity had survived, but at what cost? The news spread across the galaxy like fire through dry grass. Within hours, every spacefaring civilization knew what had happened in the distant human solar system. The Valthari Dominion, the most feared military power in 3 galaxies, had sent their greatest fleet to conquer a primitive world. 2,000 warships, millions of soldiers, the most advanced weapons known to civilization, all of them destroyed in 4.7 seconds. On the Valthari homeworld, the reaction was chaos. The ruling council gathered in their great chamber, surrounded by holographic displays showing the last sensor data from their fleet. They watched the recordings again and again, trying to understand what had happened. One moment their ships were there, the next moment they were gone. No battle, no struggle, just erasure. "This is impossible," the High Chancellor said, his voice trembling. "Our shields are impenetrable. Our armor is the strongest in the galaxy. No weapon can destroy our ships so quickly." "And yet they are destroyed," replied his advisor. "Every single one. We have no survivors, no wreckage, nothing to analyze, nothing to learn from." The chamber fell silent. For the first time in their species' history, the Valthari did not know what to do. Their entire civilization was built on military strength. They had conquered hundreds of worlds through force. They had made themselves the masters of the galaxy through violence. Now they had encountered something stronger than themselves. In the weeks that followed, the Valthari Dominion collapsed. Different factions blamed each other for the disaster. Military leaders who had supported the invasion were executed. Political rivals used the chaos to seize power. Civil war erupted across their empire. The species they had conquered saw an opportunity. Rebellions broke out on 100 worlds. Slave populations rose up against their masters. The Great Dominion, which had seemed eternal and unbreakable, began to fall apart. Meanwhile, humanity stepped onto the galactic stage. The first official diplomatic mission launched 3 months after the battle. The ship was called the New Dawn, and it carried Ambassador Marcus Chen, formerly Captain Chen, along with representatives from every nation on Earth. Their mission was simple: to introduce humanity to the galaxy and to establish peaceful relations with other species. Their reception was mixed. On some worlds, they were welcomed as heroes. Species that had suffered under Valthari rule were grateful to the humans for ending the Dominion's reign of terror. They offered friendship, trade agreements, and cultural exchange. They wanted to learn about these strange beings who had hidden in plain sight for so long. On other worlds, they were feared. "You destroyed 2,000 ships in 5 seconds, said the ambassador from the Kreeth Federation, a coalition of peaceful species that had always avoided conflict with the Valthari. "How do we know you will not do the same to us?" Ambassador Chen answered the same way every time this question was asked. "We did not want to fight," he said. "We gave them 6 hours to leave. We sent an envoy to beg them to turn around. We did everything we could to avoid bloodshed. They refused to listen. They chose war. And they faced the consequences." He paused and looked around the room at the alien delegates. "We have no interest in conquest. We have no desire to rule the galaxy. We only want to live in peace, to trade with our neighbors, to explore the stars. But we will never be slaves. We will never be conquered. And we will never warn twice." The words became famous across the galaxy. They were translated into 1,000 languages, spoken in 1,000 diplomatic halls, written on 1,000 documents. "We will never warn twice." It was a promise and a threat wrapped in the same sentence. 5 years after the battle, a new interstellar government was formed. It was called the Galactic Council, and it included representatives from over 50 species. Humanity was offered a founding seat, a position of honor and responsibility that would shape the future of interstellar civilization. Some species objected. They argued that humans were too young, too inexperienced, too dangerous to be trusted with such power. They pointed to the destruction of the Valthari fleet as evidence that humanity was violent and unpredictable. But others disagreed. "The humans did not start that war," said Elder Vorn, an ancient being from a species that had watched civilizations rise and fall for millions of years. "The Valthari came to their home with weapons drawn and death in their hearts. The humans defended themselves. Nothing more, nothing less." He turned to Ambassador Chen. "I have a question for you, human. You could have shown your strength earlier. You could have revealed your weapons before the Valthari even entered your system. You could have prevented all of this. Why did you wait?" Chen was quiet for a long moment before answering. "Because we hoped we would never have to use them. We built those weapons 200 years ago. When we first realized that the galaxy was a dangerous place, we hid them because we did not want to be seen as a threat. We stayed quiet because we wanted to be left alone." He stood up and looked around the room at the dozens of alien species watching him. "We gave the Valthari a choice. We gave them every chance to live. They could have turned around and gone home. They could have hugged their families and watched their children grow. But they chose to ignore our warning. They chose to attack. They made their decision, and we made ours." His voice softened. "We do not celebrate what we did. We do not feel pride in the destruction we caused. Every day, I think about the millions of beings who died because their leaders were too arrogant to listen. I wish it could have been different, but we will not apologize for protecting our home. We will not apologize for surviving." Elder Vorn nodded slowly. "Then welcome to the Council, Ambassador Chen. May your species bring peace to the galaxy, as you have brought peace to your own world." Humanity had arrived. 20 years later, a monument was built on Earth's moon. It was a simple structure, a tall pillar of black stone facing outward toward the stars. It carried no names, because there were too many dead to count. It displayed no images of battle, because there was no battle to show. It only bore a single inscription, carved in 1,000 languages so that any being in the galaxy could read it. "We come in peace. We leave in peace. But we will not be taken in pieces." People from across the galaxy came to see the monument. Some came to honor the dead. Some came to understand what had happened. Some came simply to see the world that had changed the course of galactic history. One day, a human girl visited the monument with her grandmother. The girl was 7 years old, with bright eyes and curious questions. She had been born after the battle, in a time of peace and prosperity, and she did not fully understand what the monument represented. "Grandma," she asked, "why is this here? What happened?" The grandmother knelt down beside her. She was old now, with gray hair and wrinkled skin, but her eyes were still sharp. She had been a young woman when the Valthari came. She remembered the fear, the waiting, the terrible silence before the weapons fired. "A long time ago," she said, "some very foolish people came to hurt us. We asked them to leave. We begged them to leave, but they would not listen. What happened to them? They went away," the grandmother said simply, "and they never came back." The girl looked up at the monument. at the strange writing that she could not read, at the stars shining above them in the darkness. Will anyone ever try to hurt us again? The grandmother smiled and pulled her granddaughter close. Maybe someday. The galaxy is very big, and there are many beings out there who might want to take what we have. But they all know the same thing now. They know that we will defend ourselves. They know that we will not surrender. And they know that we will never warn twice. She pointed at the stars. Out there, they used to think we were prey. They used to look at our little world and see an easy target. But now they know better. And maybe, just maybe, they will choose friendship instead of war. Maybe they will learn from the past instead of repeating it. The girl nodded solemnly, not fully understanding but sensing the importance of her grandmother's words. Above them, the stars continued to shine. The galaxy continued to turn. And humanity, the species that had once been alone and silent in the darkness, stood among the stars as equals, respected, feared, and finally at peace. Not because they were violent, not because they were cruel, but because they had learned the oldest lesson of the universe: speak softly, carry a big stick, and never warn twice.